Hey everyone, welcome. What you see here is a worm bin, and it's the oldest of my worm bins. It's set up in this unusual way because it's migrating, or we're trying to accomplish a horizontal migration of where the worms were, which is in their old bedding, and where we want them to move in, which is this newly set up horizontal migration feeding area. So the system was in service now for 225 days. And the worms that inhabit this box are the ones that I refer to as my original worms. The only worms in my population that can actually be traced back to the original first bin of worms that I received ever. So they're kind of sentimental in a way, and they're doing great. They've gone from a tiny population to what now seems like a completely normal, full-fledged and fully populated bin. So we initiated the migration, and that first feeding of food over here was left to go 8 days. And when we came back in, not only did we add food, we gave the system a pretty good upturn and tilling to see if we can help it dry by bringing the damp stuff below up and sinking down the dry stuff that was out on the surface. And the next time we came in, which was 12 days later, the last time we checked in here, we did start to see some improvement of the material under here, and it was starting to crumble, which was really nice. And it was starting to look like we got a pretty good turnout of worms, but we went ahead and we added a whole bunch of cabbage and carrots and bedding into this last time, and then we let it go another 12 days. And we were kind of anticipating that within a fairly short period of time, this material should be getting pretty nice as far as its crumbly texture, because one thing that's really not that good with castings are the castings that kind of stick and clump together a lot, and a lot of times it's just a little bit of excess moisture. And in this case, when we felt that that was the situation, we decided to go with really skimpy coverings that would allow for a good amount of the moisture to just leave the system through evaporation. So the stuff I'm feeling out here on the surface is dry, and it does kind of crumble unless it's really dry, and then it's like a little boulder. So the right place is somewhere in the middle. That's the thing. A lot of times when you do break open one of these clumps, it's got something in the middle of it. It's got like a chunk of food or a little piece of bedding. So I just wonder how much stuff like this we're going to free from these overly damp chunks of material. So we're just going to do the same thing here. I wasn't really even intending to add food because I thought that there might be a pretty good amount of leftovers still in here from the previous few feedings. My main objective here today was to just make sure that the material's been tilled up again. After 12 days, the material out on the surface is nice and dry, and I think it will benefit the material that's down lower to be brought up to the surface to give that stuff an opportunity to dry a little bit as well. Oop. Gotta be careful before I make a mess. And the one observation I'm definitely making here is that the material does continue to seem to get more and more fine as time goes on. It's just really nice stuff, and it's always had this really nice crumbly texture to it, even when it was just obviously way too damp. But it's getting even nicer now, so I think just by tilling it up, introducing little pockets of air into the material throughout, dropping the more dry stuff down low to suck in some of the neighboring material's moisture, and then also bringing some of the really damp stuff out to the surface, I think all will help contribute to the ongoing nice drying of this material. Because, until the stuff dries out a little bit better, I really don't expect to see a lot of worms moving out of it. There's just worms everywhere within this stuff. And I know that I just kind of bought everything all over the place, so we never even really did a thorough examination of the very furthest edge of the bin, where you would expect to see the fewest number of worms. But I don't think there's any one section of the bin that's starting to get depopulated yet, because it's all still quite damp and cozy. So there's worms pretty much in all parts of it. But I think as long as we keep coming in regularly to give the stuff a nice little aeration and tilling up, we'll be in good shape. It'll continue to dry gradually. I can definitely tell that it's, coming along even better than it was last time when we checked in on it. And last time too, we already observed it was improving from the previous time. So I think this stuff's looking quite nice. I think we've pretty much stirred up the majority of it. Worms everywhere. The worms all look really good. I think, you know, an indicator of good healthy worms I thought was like a good dark color versus being really pale and wimpy looking. And if, you know, a good color worm is an indication of a healthy worm, then these are some good healthy looking worms. I mean, they're not huge, but I think that's also a sign of the fact that they're being stored in a somewhat small container. I was kind of under the impression that if a population of worms lives in a really, really large container, then they'll grow to larger sizes. But if they live in a small container, they'll remain smaller in size. And none of my systems are really that big that I think I have the, I don't think I've got the ability to really breed big, huge worms, just based on the space limitations. Although we could probably use other tricks, you know, feed them really well and stuff like that. It's kind of cool because as I, you know, start to slow down a little bit, I just start to look a little bit more carefully. I don't even take it out of the castings. I just, you know, spot little things in the castings. Here's a cocoon. And, you know, the presence of these cocoons is also kind of one of the reasons I'm not really trying to hurry through this migration. Because I thought that perhaps we can just gradually continue increasing the size of the feeding area when it makes sense to do so. And gradually give the cocoons in this material time to also hatch and let those babies also join the crowd. And I know that that would take quite some time, so I don't know if, you know, that's going to play out as planned. But it'd be kind of nice. As long as the stuff is still kind of moist the way it is, it should be an environment in which the cocoons could hatch. Alright, so either way, I hope that this tilling up continues to help dry things here. And it's not even so much that it's very damp anymore. I mean, it's a little damper than it would need to be screened so that it can really all crumble into a very fine consistency. But I don't think it would take a lot to get there. But you know what? Before we close up shop here, I do want to take a quick look on the feeding area, see how things are progressing in here. What they got last time was a bunch of really tiny, small shredded bits of cabbage and carrots. It was like this, like a pre-packaged mix with which you would make some coleslaw. And the stuff was frozen, so that would have given it a good jump start on the breakdown process. But somehow I get this sense that there's probably not going to be a lot of leftovers of that stuff. Because cabbage is just one of those things that the worms really, really like. Carrots as well. So things are looking pretty good in here. A good number of worms appear to have turned out for this little party here. Everything's really damp and gooey. And I don't even know if we've added moisture to this. It could just be the moisture that came in with all the different feedings that have been placed in here. There's some large chunks of paper and stuff like that down low, maybe cardboard too. That's what I think this is, cardboard. Stuff laid in as bedding beneath the feeding, or feedings at this point. As we start to make our way to the opposite side of the feeding area, now we're going to bump into a couple things. One of them was this, alright, it's not this, it was elsewhere. It would be somewhere down the middle. It was a type of paper that's used to wrap the toilet paper rolls when the toilet papers are all each individually wrapped in a piece of paper. And the paper had this kind of really slick and smooth texture to it. It made me wonder if it might have been coated in wax or something, and I didn't know if it would be safe to use as a bedding material, so I gave it a test in here to see if it breaks down by being exposed to the food. And I thought that if there was a whole bunch of traffic and a bunch of worms coming through to get at their food and that paper was in the way, then they would eat it if they could. And you know, the paper is so flimsy and thin. I bet if it was eaten, it was probably eaten a long time ago. Because it wasn't put in here 12 days ago. I believe it was put in here in the previous feeding 24 days ago. So unless it was kind of crumbled up, this might be actually a piece of it. No, maybe not. It's a piece of coffee filter, I believe. Or newspaper. So maybe I was just being overly cautious with that paper, but I'm starting to get the feeling that there's really no problem using that stuff. So I think I will actually begin using it. Or maybe try to conduct some other simple little informal test to see if I can confirm that the worms like it and they eat it. It's so difficult for me to tell like how far along we are with this process, you know. Do we have, you know, the majority of the worms in here already, or do we only have a small amount of them? I mean, we certainly saw a good number of them out in the material at large in the finished castings. But if you kind of poke around a little bit underneath the material in here, you do see a good number of worms all hanging out in here. But I hope I don't kind of scare them out of the collection area back into the finished castings by being so rough with them. Alright, you know, let's, somehow to me it just feels like there's no need to add more food into this. You know, I saw banana stems. I think and this is all paper, right? Paper, bedding. Could this be the paper I was interested in? No, that's a paper towel. I'm starting to wonder if it would be a good idea for me to grab a few chunks of food just to throw in here. In fact, I think we could even use some of what remained of what we put in here last time, because it was too much, what I bought down here. So I believe I had put some of it aside, and I never ended up using it anywhere else. And it seems to have worked well. And there could be little bits of it remaining, because there is kind of a little bit of a pungent cabbagey smell. But nothing obvious, nothing that stands out. I mean, the stuff was shredded. It was tiny particle matter, so if there was leftovers of it, I believe that smelling it would be the only way to tell that it was there. So, yeah, you know what? I kind of like the idea of building this out a little bit more. We'll push some of this back over and drop it back down just to try to maintain a pretty good sized surface area where the evaporation can continue. But I do like the idea of also building this up a little bit as well. So I'm going to go grab those few bits of leftover coleslaw mix that I've got up in my freezer, and we'll use a little bit of fresh bedding in here, and we'll get this whole thing set up for these little guys. I'll be back in a minute. We tried putting everything that was in this bag into here last time. In fact, we just emptied the whole thing, and then we actually started picking out some of these larger chunks because it seemed like, I don't know, about half of this was probably adequate. So rather than putting the whole thing in, we did put it all in, but then we retrieved some of it. But at this point, I think it's safe to put the rest of it in. But before we do, we're going to, let's see, we've got some recycled bedding bits here. But we've also got my prepared bedding mix over here too. So a little combination of both dropped in below where the food's going to go would be the way to do it. I always tend to keep putting the newest feedings on the further side so that the worms, I don't know, got to just come through all this existing stuff to get at the new stuff. I don't know, whatever. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Not like they're going to do that. Whatever the reason, I don't know. So let's drop in a sprinkling of this stuff. Let's drop in a few of these. And I think once this stuff here begins thawing, it'll probably provide a good amount of moisture to this feeding area. Yeah, this is probably equal to what they received last time, roughly speaking, in quantity, I think. So let's just start bringing this stuff back. You know, I'm really tempted to go find myself a little chunk of cardboard with which we might be able to fashion a replacement for our now pretty far gone little divider. It's incredible that the entire height of this portion of it is still here. The rest of it looks like it was all nibbled away, or maybe it was just torn away by me by accident. This is silly. I'm sure most people don't bother putting up a partition when they're trying to get the worms to move over. It's just, usually it's probably just a matter of setting up a new place that you want them to go. And in this case, you know, a commingling of the materials over here probably doesn't make a whole lot of difference anymore. What's in our feeding area is a lot of castings anymore, with all the worms moving in and eating and hanging out and staying. So I'm wondering if it's time to do away with it. You know, let's see if we can just keep it here as more of a symbolic position, just to show us where the dividing line is, roughly speaking. And then we could just backfill so that it stays right where it belongs. And we'll bring it all up to the level. And I think the stuff's gonna get nicer and nicer. It's definitely more crumbly than it was previously. Right now we've brought a bunch of the damp stuff up to the surface. We've sunken a bunch of dry stuff down into the damp material below, which will also suck in some of the moisture, help equalize things. And this seems to be a nice way to let the material dry. I wonder if it could be happening more quickly without any sort of ill effects. Like I've been saying over and over, I'm not in a hurry, so it really doesn't matter how long it takes. So we'll just wait it out, and it'll get done when it gets done. So just gonna plop a little bit more of this bedding over the top of our fresh food. I'm not sure if carrots and cabbage are the sort of thing that are going to attract a bunch of bugs or pests, but I really rather just not find out and try to cover the food up in such a way that it doesn't kind of tip off any nearby passerby flying insects that there might be yummy food to be had down here. And luckily this plastic's doing quite a nice job keeping the moisture down here in the feeding area, keeping things nice and cozy, just the way the worms like it. And, well, you know, out here, things are also quite cozy. Oh, jeez. I bought coffee that I was going to give them too. Have we gone so far that it's too late to drop it in here? You know what? I'm just going to set this aside. We'll use it in a future feeding elsewhere. Sometimes I've just got to tell myself, nope, you forget stuff, then it's just going to be left out and it'll have to go elsewhere. No big deal. It just seemed like everything was already set here, and the food that we added is plenty. They don't need all that extra coffee either. We'll just make good use of that someplace else. So, 32 days and counting on the migration of the worms out of their material. And the fact that we started out with fairly damp stuff, you know, it's probably not too big of a surprise to most people that they're still hanging out in this stuff, but I believe that in time it's going to become such that they might desire something a little bit more cozy, a little bit more damp, and maybe that'll lead them into this spot over here. So that's it for today's video, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks so much for watching.